Right, so if you decide that instead of using the whole population and you decide to take a sample to collect the data from, so basically you have to use a sampling technique. You have to decide how do you take the sample. You couldn't simply just, you know what, so I'm out of 100, I'm just going to pick like just 50. No, you couldn't do that. So that is basically techniques that you can actually choose from. So those techniques can actually be divided into two categories: the non-probability sampling and also probability sampling. So non-probability sampling is based on the judgment of the experimenter. Basically non-probability sampling is like it's based on someone's instinct on who do you pick. Okay, so basically like there is no probability involved. It's just based on your feeling. Who do you pick to choose? Who do you want to pick? All right, so that is not probability sampling. And probability sampling, on the other hand, is like probability is involved at the beginning of the experiment. I know right away that this person, the probability of him being picked is going to be 1 over 100, or the probability of this person is being picked is going to be 1 over 5, and so on. Okay, so that's the difference between non-probability sampling and probability sampling. So let's have a look at them now. So these are the examples of non-probability sampling. So it's involved all of this, and these are example of probability sampling. So there are so many sampling methods that you can actually choose from. You just have to pick one that suits you the best, and of course there will be a pro and cons for each of them. Okay, let's start with the non-probability sampling method. As I told you before, so this sampling method is more on judgment, is more on the feeling of someone. Okay, for example, the first one is going to be judgment sampling. So how do you pick the sample? So data is selected based on opinion of one or more expert. So somebody who is called an expert is going to decide who should you sample. Okay, let me give you an example. Okay, let's say I'm a lecturer at UMP, and people want to see what is going to be, like I'm going to use the same example. So mean CGPA of UMP students. So being a lecturer at UMP, I might be biased about it. So I want the people to see that, well, UMP students are like super bright, clever students. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to pick a certain group of students that might be, you know, bright, so that the CGPA will be higher. So that is like judgment sampling. So it could be, like as the example that I've shown you before, it could be bias. So you pick a sample based on someone's feeling. So based on my feeling, this is going to be the group of students that I'm going to pick for the sample. So that is called as being judgment sampling. Alright, so voluntary sampling. Voluntary sampling, the easiest example is it's happened something in the TV or a radio show. I think radio show is going to be the most common one. For example, it's going to be Juara Lagu soon. Okay, so what happened during Juara Lagu is that the radio is going to ask the listeners, so what song do you think is going to be the Juara Lagu this year? Okay, so like people call, like during, they were like busy on their way to school, on their way to work, and they say, oh, I think that this song from Siti Nurhaliza is going to win for this Juara Lagu. Or you know what, I think that Aizad is going to win, or whoever that is that you like. Or you know what, like this year I think that Dain Faiza is definitely going to pay spot on. Okay, so it's a voluntary sampling. So your sample, your population is going to be all Malaysians. Any Malaysians who listen to the radio can actually volunteer to answer. So whether who are going to call you, so that is called as being voluntary sampling. It's based on the person's willingness to call the radio. Because if you ask me would I do that, I would say no. I have to find the number, I have to call and simply telling like which song that I think is going to win. So not many people are willing to do such a thing. I mean, at least not me. Probably you are. Okay, so that is voluntary sampling. So you are willing to do it. So convenience sampling is going to be the third one. Convenience sampling means that I choose the sample based on what is easy for me. Okay, for example, let's say if I wanted to know, so how many, like, not how many, what is like the proportion of students at UMP that need glasses? instead of like sampling, like asking, like choosing randomly, like who should I sample from that for you MP students, what I can do is, what is going to be easiest for me, I can sample from my students. For example, I have 4 sections of statistics student. So I can simply, so that's got to be 4 multiplied by 60, that's already 240 students. That's actually a big sample. So I can actually sample just from my student. So why? Because it's convenient, it's easy for me. Okay, so that is called as being convenient sampling. You do what's easy for you. And of course, now that is all for non-probability. So now we get to the probability sampling method. Okay, probability sampling method is when you actually do some calculation. There's some calculation involved, not just filling, in order to come out with the sample. Okay, the first one is called as random sampling. Okay, so for example, how do you do random sampling? I have 100 people. That is my population. My population consists of 100 people. So from 100 people, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose 20 people for my sample. Okay, so what I'm going to do if I decide to use random sampling is that I'm going to number all my population. So I have 100 populations, so I'm going to number them. So this is person number 1, his name is Abu. So person number 2, it's Sally. Person number 3, it's who is it? Pavitran. Okay, for example, I have student named Pavitran. Student number 4 is going to be Hazik, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to number them all until the 100 people, 100 person. So for example, 100 person, she is called Rita. Okay, so what happens is that after I have numbered them from 1 to 100, which is my whole population, I'm going to pick 20 of them. How do I pick this 20 people? It will be random. That is why it's called as random sampling. I will generate random numbers. Okay, so how do I generate these random numbers? So of course, so the easiest way to generate that is by using softwares. Like you can use Excel to do that. You can use R. There are all sorts of. You can also like go to your I don't know, online, or go into your web browser and just type in like generate random numbers, and like there will be platform for you to generate random numbers. Basically, you don't come out with those numbers. Machine come out with those for you. Okay, for example, my random numbers, they're going to pick 20 numbers like 1, 3, 5 until I got altogether 20 numbers. So my sample is going to be 1 Abu, 3 Pavitran, 5 whoever the 5th number is. So it's going to be 20 numbers produced. Okay, so that is called as being random sampling. So I decide who is going to be in the sample, so based on the generated random numbers. So this is the example how random numbers is done. Where is it? I think it's somewhere down here. How to generate random numbers. Yes, see, this is how you do it. Okay, so the software basically just going to come out with numbers for you. You can try that for yourself later. Okay, so that's first random sampling. The second will be systematic sampling. Okay, so as the name suggests, it's a systematic, so it will be a fixed number. So what happened is that a set of data is numbered from 1 to n. N is the number of your whole population. Okay, for example, as if I would use my previous example, I have 100 population and I want to pick 20 people, 20 sample. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all my population until the 100 person. Okay, and after I had list them all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to count the value of k. So if you have a look at notation, so k, so that is going to equal capital N. We know that capital N is number of population. For my case, my number of population is going to be 100 over small n. So small n is number of sample, and for this case my sample should be 20. So 100 divided by 20, that should be a 5. So what I'm going to do is, okay, so the first data is selected randomly within the number of 1 and k. So 1 and k is going to be from 1 to 5. So this is going to be from 1 to 5. I'm going to randomly select a number. Again, how do you randomly do that? So I can simply just ask someone, or I can generate the number by using the software and so on. For example, so I generate the number, like I had like 1 2 3 4 5. I asked this the computer to generate me a number, and let's say the computer come out with the number 2. So my first sample is going to be the person at number 2. Okay, and how do I come across the next preceding person? So the next preceding person will be 2 plus k. So what is my k value? K is equal 5, so 2 plus 5. So the next person will be number 7. That is going to be my second sample. And what is going to be, who is going to be my third sample? I'm going to have another plus 5, and that is going to be the person in position number 12 and so on. So you're going to keep adding the number until altogether you get 20 names. Okay, so that is how it goes for the case of systematic sampling. So you got a specific number and you use that number for every interval. Okay, and remember, this is going to be the formula. The formula is going to be k equal capital N over N. Okay, now we come across stratified sampling. Okay, what happened for the stratified sampling is that you are going to put your population into groups. Okay, so there's going to be first group, second group, third group, and with how many groups you are. For example, if I have UMP students, so how can I actually group them? I can group them according to their college. So those for people from KK, College Kejuruteraan. So those people from FTK, and those people from FIS, and from the computer faculty and so on. Okay, so that is like one way I can classify UMP students. Okay, so what happens is that when you do stratified sampling is that you are going to take the sample from each of the group. So from this, I'm going to take some sample. From this group, I'm going to take some sample. From the third group, some sample. And for the fourth group, it's going to be some sample. So basically, you divide that into group, and each group, you're going to pick certain number of people. Okay, and how do you pick those people? So there are two ways. It could either be random sampling. Okay, so you call as random stratified sampling. Or it could be systematic. So that's possible as well. Systematic. What is wrong with my spelling? Okay, so that is how you pick the person from each of the group that you have over here. The main point is that your sample has to come from each of the group. So that's called stratified sampling. And the last one is going to be cluster sampling. The idea is going to be the same with stratified sampling. You still have to divide all your population into groups. However, the difference is that so you can only pick certain group. For example, for this case right here, I only pick group number 2 and group number 4, and from those two groups I'm going to take everyone. So remember, from these two groups you take everyone instead of like picking a certain sample. No, you don't do that, you pick everyone. So basically, which one is easier? Cluster sampling is easier. Okay, so instead of like having to do it from each group, you just pick how many groups you needed, and then from all the group, select everyone. Okay, again, let me clarify to you what is the difference between stratified and cluster. So the similarity is that both are going to be the case that population is divided into groups. Okay, but for the case of stratified, you have to sample from each group. But for the case of cluster, you pick, you sample certain groups. Okay, and you take everyone in the group. So that will be the difference between cluster sampling and stratified sampling. So there are all, of course, pro and cons for each sampling technique. So one thing would be good for this one thing would be bad for this one. Anything that is easy and convenient, so it would be like sort of biased and so on, and you want to avoid that. So it's up to you how do you going to pick. So please read all of this. Okay, so it's going to be like a good way for you to try to figure out so which one is better for you when you do statistical problem solving. And these are going to be the advantage